Hello, my name is Sid Snitkin, and I lead the industrial cybersecurity team at ARC. Today's podcast is a preview of the kinds of interesting cybersecurity sessions we have planned for our upcoming ARC forum in February in Orlando, Florida. Now, in particular, we've invited Mark Denaire of NaturEner, which is a wind-based alternative energy supplier, to describe what he will be discussing in his forum presentation, which will be one of the first case study sessions we have. Now, NaturEner is a customer of Dragos, and we've asked Rob Lee, the CEO of Dragos, to introduce Mark and tell us why he thought that Mark could make a very interesting presentation, what's unique and what's interesting about it. So, Rob, if you'd like to introduce Mark.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so when I look at the industrial security community and I look at the challenges that folks are up against, there's a couple of things that always stand out to me. Number one is a lot of what industrial asset owners are getting told today is almost a copy and paste of IT security best practices. And that is completely inappropriate. Your industrial environment is different. It has a different mission than typical IT environments. It deserves a different focus and a different approach. We need to be informed by the actual threats, not just random events. And we also need to make sure that we are capturing knowledge and making it scalable. That's one of the big challenges of the community in general is there's not a ton of ICS cybersecurity practitioners. I think the DHS puts the numbers around 500 in North America. No matter how you slice and dice it, it's not enough. So how do we really understand what the threats are? How do we really understand and capture that knowledge and make it scalable? And more importantly, how do we understand that these industrial environments are different from each other? The substation in Baltimore is different than the substation in DC. Scale that out to different industries, different types of energy production, different types of manufacturing processes, you get a different environment. There's no one size fits all solution. So what really sort of caught my attention with Mark Denaire and his team, besides the fact of just knowing Mark and his background and seeing also just a very technical CIO, which is always an exciting and sort of good thing to see in a company. It's this aspect that they are a balancing authority that is entirely in the wind energy market. And you want to talk about the changes coming to the grid that are taking place all around the world. I mean, many of these have taken place in Europe already, but especially in the U.S. as we sort of chase cheaper energy. What does that mean not only to our grid, but what does it mean in terms of security? How do we design a flexible approach to make sure that we account for these changes? Your ICS is neither small nor static, and it is not the same as anybody else's. And I think when we look at wind energy and the balancing authority around that, that is a great example of how different things can be. And while we don't have to reinvent the entire wheel, we can look at those changes and what they mean. So with that sort of verbose introduction, Mark, I'll kick it over to you to talk about really why things are different and sort of how you approach these challenges, and then as a preview to that talk.
Great. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. So yeah, the industrial control space is pretty diverse. So Rob's discipline covers a multitude of different industries, manufacturing, chemical, petrochemical. My space particularly is utility oriented. So I come from a traditional utility environment, and in those environments, again, it's a mixture of IT, OT. Those particular environments, they are focused on mainly their control system architectures, talking out to their substation assets, which are controlling whatever resources they have, whether they're load serving entities providing distribution to customers, or whether they're controlling generation resources or whatever. Our particular space is renewable only. So we own and operate the only two wind-only balancing authorities within the NERC footprint within North America. So it's a very, very unique environment. I was drawn to it just from that perspective. So when I came here, very interesting. I went through a certain amount of a steep learning curve and discovery on what type of assets and issues are here. Again, coming from a traditional utility environment and trying to translate those security paradigms and models and critical infrastructure protection standards that are heavily in play in those environments into the renewable space here. So, our assets are quite diverse. We have probably 267 some odd megawatt and a half wind turbines in two different projects located remotely up in the northern Montana area. So when I first started to look at this, we built out the traditional EMS system to control these assets, but it didn't look like a traditional generator to me. So having some experience with integrating wind farms, I started to dig into the lower layers of what was going on with the wind farm itself. So what I found was a real eye-opener, and this is the beginning of the story of how I was introduced and met Rob, and how we developed a partnership here to mitigate some of these issues. And that came when we started to integrate the control systems that we had here with the wind farm assets in order to manage those generation assets. And looking at that, the folks that were here traditionally just looked at it as a big generator that they connected to, and they sent a control signal to. The wind farms produced, and that was it. To me, it was a little more complex. I started to dig into that architecture, and it was a real eye-opener. So the wind farms itself have a complex set of interconnected devices that typically utilities or folks aren't really paying attention to, and this is at the ICS level. So when I first got here, looking at the connection, it was just a big cloud out there. The wind farm itself, there was a wind farm management system that was connected to the wind farm through a PLC, which sent out the control signals and talked to all those devices there. So nobody was paying attention to what was going on down at that low layer. So when I started to look at it and dug into it, I saw a lot of complex interconnected devices. It was to the point where I started to educate myself, or needed to educate myself, on what that threat profile and that threat surface looked like. I happened to come across Rob at teaching his SANS course on industrial control security, and struck up a conversation with him, and lo and behold, here we are today. During the course of the last year, we've deployed the Dragos platform in that environment, and we went from seeing an environment that was just a large cloud with a set of firewalls on our end to seeing over 963 interconnected IP or MAC address layer 2, layer 3 devices out there. So everybody thought there was one PLC, and in fact, we had multitudes of PLCs and interconnected devices out in that environment. Now, what's really interesting about this, though, is that most utilities who are interconnected to wind farms aren't really paying attention down at that layer. Most wind farm owners and operators don't operate as we do as a balancing authority. They operate as an independent power producer. They get a contract with a local utility. They make an interconnection. They get paid for the megawatts that they produce. What's interesting, though, is most of the people who are procuring these wind farms, and certainly that was the case with us early on, is when you buy turbines, you have a turbine supply agreement. The vendor also supplies a warranty service or a monitoring service. So lo and behold, on the other side of my network is a set of firewalls that are connected to a system operations center that my vendor has that's somewhere out in Chicago. And there's another monitoring center somewhere in Pamplona, Spain. So these are threat vectors that are not visible and not being paid attention to. And those are the concerns that I had, is that how do I manage and mitigate and monitor this type of environment to make sure that I know who's connecting to my network, what kind of traffic is going on, and how to alert my staff, because I'm trying to teach these guys how to be a hunt team, how to go out and look for these threats. But again, the focus has always been on the IT side, not necessarily on the control system side. So it was a real eye opener for me early on in how this type of environment was being perceived or being managed by traditional IT or OT folks.
Very, very interesting. I can't wait to see the full presentation at the forum. One question, a big issue we run into, and I'm just curious because I was looking at your site, our prior discussions, because you're responsible for the IT and the OT aspects there, and I see there's a lot of other applications that are not traditional control system type of applications, or higher up, and maybe it's for the balancing authority issues. But do you have an integrated strategy for that? I know it's a side question, but I'm just interested in how you're dealing with it. IT-OT convergence is a very big issue.
It is, and of course, with a smaller company like ourselves, it becomes a very big challenge. again, our control system technology is a typical utility grade, utility scale type control system with a full automatic generation control, SCADA system, any type of system that you would see. In fact, that we have the same system here that's utilized by Pacific Gas and Electric Company. It's utilized by the Peak Reliability Coordinator here. I believe MISO uses it. The Florida Reliability Council Control Center uses it. So it's a well-known system. That said, it's as complex as any utility system, even though we're small. So the support staff has to be able to manage and maintain not only that system, but the traditional IT systems that are used for day-to-day business continuity, accounting systems, email systems, desktop support, the usual suite of office environments. So, typically those environments are air-gapped, so they're completely separated to as much as possible. So some information has to flow in between them, but that presents a big challenge when you have a small team of developing the expertise in order to support both those environments, because everybody's wearing different hats on my team. Again, I try to teach them and train them to be a hunt team, but they also have to do their daily jobs as well. So everybody has a certain amount of expertise, but we try to leverage that and build some depth in the organization. A little bit of, again, it becomes a challenge because when you try to, use the concepts of, least privileges or separation of duties, and when you got a staff of 7 or 8 folks, it becomes a real challenge. So the environments are managed by the same team, but again, the disciplines are much different. And of course, the control center and the associated energy management system there is covered by a very stiff set of regulatory and critical infrastructure protection standards that must be met, that are completely different than those environments that are on the business system side. So it is a real challenge. One of the things that we try to do is to make things scalable and modular. We try to use tools, and that's why we have deployed the Dragos platform out on the control system side in order to provide us with a more real-time view and be able to manage and alert on traffic in that environment. We use different tools on the IT side that are more suited for those environments. But the reason we chose Dragos was because not only their staff has the depth of the knowledge and the depth and experience in this environment, but they specifically look for those types of protocols and traffic that are in those environments, whereas traditional IT tools that are used on the business system side, they cannot perform in that same manner. We're also interested in looking at expanding our service offerings in the future to not only manage our assets, but I think it's a great business model for basically integrating stranded wind assets who are having trouble integrating in the grid. That's one of the business drivers we had in becoming a balancing authority, is because our assets were connected or were going to connect into a very weak grid up in the northern Montana area, and the balancing costs for us, if we had the utility do it, was astronomical. So that kind of forced us into this business model where we would become our own balancing authority, which is quite challenging when you think you have to predict and forecast what the wind is going to do over a 24-hour period, and then schedule that energy and meet that schedule. So it's a very unique environment.
Well, thank you, Mark. I'm sure, by the way, anybody, as I was listening, I have a million questions for Mark, and I'm sure Mark is going to be happy to talk to you at our forum. It's a great networking event, so I'm sure Mark will be happy to do that. Well, I'm speaking for Mark, but I'm sure you will.
Oh, absolutely.
Just one thing before we close this little short podcast, we want to keep it brief, but Rob Lee is very, very well known in the industry, and as Mark said, he's also a SANS instructor and things like that. And Dragos is very well known for looking at threats and things like that. And I just wanted to give Rob an opportunity, just, relative to your experience and what you're seeing today around the power industry. You mentioned how you think this is a unique application, but there's a lot of threats going around today. I just wanted to see what you might have to say as a kind of a closing thing for the podcast about the threats in the power industry today, and where you kind of think people need to be relative to where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. I never want to come off too harshly, but I do want to be blunt with folks about serious topics and give them the information they need. And so in the spirit of that, I will say one of the things that concerns me the most today about the threats and risks we face is we are in an interesting place and time where we have the attention of the right decision makers, whether it be board and CEO level or plant manager or just the operations staff in general. We have their focus to try to make changes in a good way. But at the same time, we are also hit with quite a bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt from the larger industry saying, oh my gosh, do these things because we're all going to die, right? Every day I open up a New York Times article and, hey, the power grid's going to go down because of a phishing email. No, it's not. So I would say my big concern for folks is misinformation, guiding practices and environments that are critical. And we just don't get a tech refresh every couple of years to try to fix this. So I think it's extremely important to move forward, but it's extremely important to move forward with a purpose and an understanding of what the threats are actually doing and what risk we're actually trying to reduce. For that reason, it's important to learn from others and what they're doing effectively. Like Mark and his team, it's important to come to places like the forum to make sure that you actually hear what's going on and reduce the right risk instead of just throwing security as a general topic towards everybody else's risk.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Rob. And again, I'm sure Rob, Dragos is going to have a booth at the forum, and so I'm sure they'd be more than happy to talk to people about this. And I'm always personally fascinated when I talk to Rob and other people from Dragos. Well, I want to thank Mark and Rob for participating in this podcast today, and as well as whoever's listening, I want to thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about our ARC forum, I encourage you to go to our website, which is arcweb.com. And thank you for listening.